Hey guys, tonight we slip barefoot across cold marble floors, the kind that make your toes curl and your spine tighten. Above you, a stained glass dome flickers with candlelight like a haunted kaleidoscope. Somewhere behind those gold inlaid screens, someone is watching, or maybe not someone. Maybe 20 someones. You hear soft laughter, maybe it's flirtation, maybe it's plotting. The scent of rosewater and musk is thick in the air, clinging like secrets. You've just entered the most forbidden zone in the Ottoman Empire, the Imperial Harem. And no, it's not just a palace full of women lounging on silk pillows waiting to bathe the Sultan. It's something much stranger, darker, and smarter than that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are, because I guarantee wherever you are, it's less dangerous than being a woman inside this palace. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the Topkapi Palace, Istanbul, sometime in the late 1500s. Outside these walls, the empire stretches from Hungary to Yemen, from Algiers to Baghdad. Inside these walls, the most powerful man in the Islamic world is being slowly undressed by a woman who doesn't technically exist on any official records. Her name, you don't get to know that. Not yet, because Ottoman sultans didn't marry. Not publicly, not for love, not for state, and definitely not for gossip. Their partners' concubines, favorites, mothers of their children were hidden from the world like state secrets. You might wonder, why so much mystery? Why the secrecy? Why the enormous walled garden full of enslaved women and trained eunuchs? Why hide love behind a curtain? Simple, because love in the Ottoman Empire was political suicide. And sex? Well, sex could build an empire or end it. You lean in closer. You hear a rustle, a giggle that abruptly stops. The woman beside thee. Sultan is no random beauty. She's part of a system. She was abducted, maybe from a Ukrainian village, maybe sold by her own family, maybe captured by pirates. She was scrubbed, renamed, circumcised if needed, and trained in dance, poetry, embroidery, etiquette, religion, and yes, how to enchant a man without seeming to try. Every glance, every ankle tilt, is a calibrated performance. Because in this building, desire equals destiny, and competition is deadly. Still, historians argue whether the Sultan truly had his pick of hundreds, or if he was, in fact, picked by the cleverest woman in the room. You walk deeper into the harem, past arched doorways and marble fountains. You imagine your own reflection. In the still water, your face lit by torchlight, eyes darting. You don't belong here. No man does, unless he's a sultan or a eunuch. And yet, you're here, watching, learning, questioning. You notice the silence not peaceful but charged. This isn't a spa. This is a chessboard. And tonight, the king is sleeping with the queen, but he doesn't know she's been planning this move for years. Her mother tongue is long forgotten. Her body language is now pure Ottoman, and her ambition? It's taller than the palace walls. But here's the twist. She's not trying to escape. She's trying to stay. Because once you give the Sultan a son, you're locked into a power game that only ends in blood or glory. And tonight, she intends to win. Under the velvet canopies and dripping oil lamps, you hear whispers of an erotic story passed down in low voices. One concubine was so skilled, she was rumored to whisper poetry during sex poetry about empire, conquest, and death. Whether that's true, no one can prove it. But in the erotic spirit through history, Peter Webb claims that political seduction reached its high art form not in Versailles or Beijing, but here, in these rooms where the perfume was stronger than gunpowder. And no one played the game better than Harem Sultan. Remember her, she's coming soon. For now, linger here. smell the sweat under the roses. Imagine the heat of silk on skin. You'll need to understand this place before we unravel why the men in charge feared love more than war. Word count, 796. You blink, and now you're following footsteps that don't echo because the carpets here are thick enough to swallow sound, just like the walls swallow scandal. You're inside the deep gut of the harem now, but you don't see women, you see a man. Or rather, someone who was once a boy, once whole, now surgically split from his past. He glides like a shadow between chambers, clutching a scroll, a key, a threat. This is the chief black eunuch, the Aga of the harem, and if the Sultan is the head of the empire, this man is its spinal cord. You're not sure where to look. His eyes are sharp, but deadened. His robe is more elaborate than most princes would dare. He has no beard, no family, no descendants. But his power, immeasurable. He controls who sees the Sultan, who touches him, who dares speak his name in the inner palace. Eunuchs were the gatekeepers of Ottoman intimacy, and their existence alone says everything about the empire's paranoia over sex. Imagine trusting no man with access to your women unless he has been permanently disarmed. And by disarmed, yes, we mean precisely what you're thinking. Castrated, often brutally, often young, and trafficked from places far south: Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia. Their dark skin made them visibly distinct in the palace hierarchy, their status a cruel paradox. Mutilated slaves elevated to elite watchdogs of power. Historians still argue whether these eunuchs wielded true influence, or were just living symbols of a sexualized bureaucracy. But when the chief black eunuch could exile a concubine with a glance, or whisper a rumor that changed succession, you start to wonder if the most powerful man in the palace wasn't the Sultan at all. You trail the eunuch's movements. He passes a door where behind it, a concubine weeps. Maybe her bleeding started too soon. Maybe her son has been poisoned. Maybe she knows she'll never be called again. The eunuch doesn't pause. Empathy isn't part of his job description. Control is. He keeps a tight log of which girl saw the Sultan and when, how long the visit lasted, and what, if anything, happened afterward. Because love wasn't just private in the Ottoman harem. It was documented, surveilled, and bureaucratized. You picture the Sultan, reclining in his private chamber, surrounded by calligraphy and caged birds. His mood is sour. His favorite didn't show. Or maybe she did, but her charm is fading. He asks for someone new. The eunuch bows. He doesn't sigh, doesn't speak, just glides out with the grace of someone who's seen empires rise and fall between silk sheets. Here's a fringe detail. Some eunuchs were known to carry silver rods with ornamental heads, not weapons, but symbols of authority. One was rumored to have had a ruby-encrusted staff shaped like a crescent moon. Pure flex, and yet inside. These men lived in permanent in-betweenness, neither male nor female, neither slave nor free. Theirs was a power rooted in absence. You follow the eunuch to a smaller courtyard where two concubines are arguing in whispers. One accuses the other of using love spells. Hair buried in bread dough, nails clipped and tossed into the fire. Amulets sewn into the hems of robes. These aren't fairy tales. These are survival tactics. The eunuch raises a hand. They fall silent. Later tonight, one of them will be reported. But which one? That's for the ledger to decide. Now here's your sex story, and it's a strange one. According to Eleanor Herman in Sex with Kings, one sultan, possibly Murad IV, was rumored to have selected his concubines via dream visions. He believed that Allah spoke to him in sleep, revealing which girl would be most fertile. He once reportedly brought in a woman solely because he dreamt of her smile, even though she was mute and nearly blind. The tryst was short, awkward, and politically disastrous. She bore no children and was later accused of sorcery. Whether that's myth or muffled gossip, the story lived on. whispered through the baths and halls for years. You try to wrap your head around the contradiction, a culture that both fetishized and feared sex, elevating it to divine ritual and treating it like volatile fuel. One wrong touch could unravel an entire dynasty. And no one understood that better than the eunuchs. They didn't feel love, at least not publicly, but they felt the weight of guarding it, curating it, censoring it. They were the living vaults of the Sultan's desire, and they never forgot who held the keys. You watch the chief black eunuch disappear behind a curtain, his silhouette swallowed by the soft glow of an oil lamp. He's going to log another name, another body, another secret. You're left in the stillness, wondering how anyone managed to fall in love here at all. Word count, 797. You wake up to the scent of cloves and the distant chiming of anklets. The light is softer now, filtered through silks the color of bruised peaches. You're not sure how long you've been inside the harem, but today feels different, electric, like the whole palace is holding its breath. Someone new has risen, and her name is already causing unease among the elder concubines and the eunuchs, who track their every move. You hear it whispered in 3 different languages, all wrapped in reverence and fear. Harem. You wouldn't know it by looking at her. She wasn't born royal. She wasn't even born Muslim. She came from what's now Ukraine, likely abducted in a Tatar raid, then sold through the slave markets of Crimea, scrubbed of her old identity, and renamed the cheerful one, Harem. But don't let the nickname fool you, that smile. It's a mask. Underneath, she's calculating, brilliant, ruthless, and terrifyingly charming. She's already done the impossible. She didn't just sleep with the Sultan. She stayed. You have to understand what that means. Most concubines, even the favorites, were like passing weather, beautiful, short-lived, easily replaced. They were forbidden from marrying the Sultan, never named publicly, never allowed to stay too long in his favor. But Harem, she broke the system. She didn't just give him sons. She gave him obsession. Sultan Suleiman, the magnificent conqueror of Hungary, reformer of Ottoman law, man with a crown the size of a watermelon, fell in love. Dangerous love. The kind that turns generals into poets and thrones into cages. Historians still argue whether it was real passion or masterful manipulation, but either way, it changed the empire forever. You peer through a carved screen, and there she is, not lounging but writing. She's penning letters to Suleiman in elegant Turkish, laced with Persian poetry. She calls him my Sultan, my soul, my one and only joy. She signs them Harem, always laughing, as if mocking the chaos she's causing. Because outside these walls, ambassadors are fuming, courtiers are panicking, and the Grand Vizier? He's sweating bullets. You see, she's not supposed to be here, and yet she is. Not only did she remain in the Sultan's favor, she persuaded him to break centuries of dynastic tradition and marry her. You heard right. A slave girl became queen. Well, technically not queen, because the Ottomans had no word for that. But make no mistake, she was the power behind the veil. And the ripples were immediate. Suleiman started promoting her allies. He dismissed women he'd loved before. He even exiled his own son's mother. The harem turned into a chessboard. And Harem was both queen and queen's gambit. Here's your sex story, one that Harem herself probably orchestrated. There's a passage in the erotic spirit through history where Peter Webb recounts a rumor. One night, Suleiman refused to visit Harem, choosing instead a new Circassian girl brought in by the eunuchs. Harem, seething, sent Suleiman a gift, a single embroidered pillow soaked in her perfume, with one line stitched in gold. Asterisk, the jasmine you hold fades faster than the rose you abandoned. The Sultan returned to her bed that same night. Was it true? Maybe, or maybe it was a legend spun by scribes sympathetic to Harem's myth. Either way, it stuck. What's not up for debate is her legacy. She maneuvered herself into an official political role, worked with foreign embassies, funded massive charitable works across the empire. She even had a public mosque complex built. In her name unheard of for a concubine. Fringe fact? In that same complex, she secretly housed midwives and physicians. Many suspect it doubled as a private clinic for women in the palace. A kind of shadow ministry of feminine power. Harem wasn't just surviving in the harem. She was transforming it from a gilded prison into a command center. You wonder, as you watch her apply henna to her fingertips, how many futures were written in this room. She gave birth to 5 children, a huge number for a concubine, and fought to make sure her favorite son, Selim, would be next in line, even if it meant scheming, bribing, and maybe more. Some say she orchestrated the execution of Suleiman's eldest son, Mustafa, clearing the path for her own boy. Others insist she was innocent, framed by enemies who feared a woman with that much influence. But the truth? The truth is a ghost in the curtains. You feel it rush past your skin, cool and sharp. You know only one thing for certain: love. In the Ottoman court wasn't a fairy tale. It was war in velvet. And Harem? She never lost a battle. There's a scent in the air tonight: cinnamon, lemon, and something metallic. Not blood, exactly, but danger. You step into the harem's inner sanctum and immediately feel it. The tension you get when too many beautiful women are competing for the same impossible dream. The dream? A single night with the Sultan. Not because he's charming, he probably smells like old parchment and war sweat, but because that night might lead to a child, and that child might someday wear the sword of Osman. But to get that far, you have to survive this place first. You have to outwit spies, outlast rivals, and outcharm an entire room trained to make someone else sparkle. Tonight, a new girl is being prepared. She's been waxed, scrubbed, hennaed, perfumed, dressed in silk that's lighter than a sigh. Her hair's been dusted with jasmine powder. She is 17 and already exhausted. And somewhere someone is betting on whether she make it past the first month. See, behind the beaded curtains and poetic whispers, the harem was a nest of surveillance. Every concubine was watched, by eunuchs, by older women, by each other. A misplaced glance could be read as seduction or treason. A skipped prayer might lead to whispers of apostasy. Even gifts, tiny jeweled brooch, ornate mirrors, candied fruit weren't innocent. They were bribes. Currency in a system where intimacy was power and power was oxygen. Historians still argue whether these rivalries were spontaneous or cultivated by the Sultan himself, who may have preferred a divided harem he could control. Either way, alliances formed like fungi, fast, secretive, and slightly toxic. You think of the senior concubines, women who once reigned and now watch the younger ones with calculated smiles. They still hold influence, still control the best rooms and the juiciest rumors. Some are even retired lovers of past sultans, still living in the harem like dowagers with unfinished business. Here's your sex story. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman tells of a sultan who demanded his concubines perform erotic dances wearing nothing but veils scented with narcotic oils. One girl, clever and terrified, pretended to faint mid-performance. When he rushed to her side, she whispered that the scent reminded her of her dead mother. It worked. He wept. She stayed. And she never had to perform again. Maybe it's apocryphal. Maybe not. But in a place like this, performance was everything, and even pain could be weaponized. You continue your walk, and something odd catches your eye. A small turtle with a candle mounted on its back. It's wandering a marble hallway slowly, like it's on a mission. It's not lost. It's part of the evening's ritual. In the Ottoman harem, especially under Sultan Ahmed III, turtles were used during private garden feasts. The candles on. Their shells created low, moving light that flickered across the women's faces, blurring reality and fantasy. A surreal touch. A moving shadow show for men drunk on power. You think about that a lot, the casual surrealism of this world, where even light is choreographed, where every laugh is measured, and where the most dangerous game isn't seduction, but survival. You pass a room where two concubines sit in silence, eating sherbet from silver bowls. They aren't speaking. They're listening, trying to find out who's been summoned tonight. Was it the Circassian with the birthmark? Or the Albanian girl who quotes Persian poetry? The call doesn't come with fanfare. A silk kerchief is delivered silently by a eunuch. That's it. If you receive one, you are to bathe, perfume, dress, and wait. If you don't, you pretend it doesn't crush you. Every night. Over and over, you never ask. Never cry. Never let them see you break. That's the rule. But even the strongest crack eventually. That's where the surveillance comes in. Girls deemed unstable were removed, not with ceremony. Quietly, sent to the old palace or married off to obscure officials in the provinces. Their names erased, their faces forgotten. You might be thinking this sounds like a prison. It was, but also a school, a stage, a war zone. An empire within an empire, and no one was safe. Not even those who seemed to win. Because the higher you climb here, the sharper the knives feel. You remember the girl being prepared, her eyes darting as they line her lips with crushed beetle powder. She's not sure if this is her coronation or her funeral, and neither is anyone else. Word count, 796. You don't expect to find laughter here. Not this kind, the kind that echoes too long, slightly unhinged, like it's trying to cover up something broken. But there it is, drifting down the corridor like spilled wine. You follow it, your steps slower now, hesitant. Because this isn't the laugh of a scheming concubine or a smug eunuch. This is something stranger, heavier. It's the Sultan himself, and he's laughing at a melon. No, wait, not a melon. A woman as round as a melon, reclining on a mountain of cushions like a living dessert. Her name is Beckerpear, which means sweet pastry. And tonight, she is the center of Sultan Ibrahim, the first's entire universe. Yes, this is the same Ibrahim they called the Mad. A man who spent years locked up in the caves, a gilded cage meant to preserve the bloodline, but often shattered the mind. When his brother died and he was finally released, no one thought he'd rule. He'd spent so long in isolation that the first thing he did as Sultan was demand a concubine. Not just any woman, but the fattest in the empire. Not just plump, enormous. He believed truly, deeply, that large women were lucky, fertile, and spiritually powerful. So the palace scoured the provinces, the markets, the foreign courts. They brought him Beckerpear, reportedly weighing over 300 pounds, and draped her in pearls and brocade. He adored her, obsessed over her, built entire poems around the curves of her knees. And the court? Horrified, terrified, but powerless. Because what could they say? Love, especially this kind, was supposed to be hidden, dignified, useful. Instead, it was erupting in full view, bizarre and uncontainable. Historians still argue whether Ibrahim was truly insane or just deeply traumatized by the isolation and paranoia of palace life. What's certain is that his reign turned the harem into a circus. One record claims he sent palace guards to ransack the homes of Jewish merchants, not for gold, but for exotic oils and aphrodisiacs. Another rumor says he tried to drown 280 concubines in the Bosphorus after suspecting one of them had slept with another man. That story might be embellished, but it doesn't feel impossible, does it? Not here. Not now. Not when power is this absolute and unchecked. You look again at Beckerpear. She's not just a body. She's a symbol of desire unfiltered, of indulgence, with no brakes, of what happens when a man raised in silence finally gets to speak, and the only language he knows is craving. And yet, she smiles. There's something knowing in it. She knows she won't last, that this love is a fever, that the laughter won't last forever, but for now, she reigns. She has servants of her own, influence, jewels. She even signs royal decrees in his name briefly, madly, gloriously. Here's your sex story. In the history of sexuality, Foucault notes how regimes obsessed with controlling bodies often end up producing extreme behaviors at the margins: fetishes, fixations, entire architectures of pleasure and paranoia. Ibrahim's love life reads like a case study in that exact paradox. Forbidden from marrying, forbidden from public intimacy, told from childhood that every sexual act must be secret or strategic. When he finally exploded into power, it was inevitable that his desire would spiral into spectacle. You step away from the laughter through another archway. There, scribes sit with trembling hands, recording edicts the Sultan dictated while sprawled across Kekirper's thighs. One day, she asks for a palace of her own. The next, she's gifted a diamond the size of a pigeon's egg. The palace is built. The diamond is lost. The empire shrugs. Fringe detail? Ibrahim once tried to tie gold coins to the tails of pigeons and release them over the city. A kind of royal blessing, or maybe just a prank. The pigeons mostly crashed into walls, but people talked about it for years. You glance back one more time. The laughter's quieter now, more like humming. He's feeding her candied rose petals one by one. A sultan and his concubine, drunk on sugar, lost in a delusion no one dares interrupt. And somehow it's beautiful. Not because it's healthy, but because it's human. And in this palace of masks and schemes, even madness feels like honesty. Word count, 799. You wake to chanting, not the kind from the mosques, but softer, rhythmic, feminine. It's coming from a courtyard where rows of girls kneel in unison, repeating lines of poetry while balancing bowls on their heads. Their backs are straight, their eyes low, and their voices blend like the hiss of silk in motion. This isn't punishment. This is training. Welcome to the hidden university of the Ottoman Empire, the Harem School. Except here, the degree isn't in mathematics or science. It's in charm, grace, and survival. You sit beneath an archway, hidden in the shadows, watching as a girl fumbles a word and earns a flick to the ear from her instructor. She's maybe 12, maybe 13, but she already knows the stakes. You see, not every girl in the harem was here for the Sultan's bed. Many would never even meet him. The majority were part of a grand pipeline brought in from conquered lands, gifted by regional governors, or purchased at enormous expense. They came as slaves, yes, but once inside, they were reshaped into instruments of the court. Taught to read the Quran, to embroider tulips and peacocks with gold thread, to recite Persian love poems and play the oud with fingers so light they could pluck a man's heart out. And always, always, they were watched. The school operated like a theater company mixed with a boot camp. Older women called kalfas and Eustace drilled etiquette, storytelling, dance. A girl who spoke out of turn might spend a week scrubbing copper pots. One who learned fast, she might be dressed in richer fabrics and placed closer to the center of palace life. Every inch of your being here was graded. Your walk, your laugh, even how you sat. Were your knees too far apart? Did your scent overpower the rose water in the room? All of it mattered. Scholars still debate whether this training was empowering or dehumanizing. On one hand, it was brutal, a system built on captivity. On the other, it was a rare path for a non-Turkish, non-Muslim girl to ascend to immense power. Because if you succeeded, you didn't just become a lover, you could become the mother of a prince. And in the Ottoman world, mothers mattered. A valid sultan, mother of the reigning sultan, could rule empires from behind the curtain. But first, you had to master the script. The language of passive suggestion, of "I only want what you want, my lord," even while pulling every string. Behind the scenes, Here's your sex story, or rather, your anti-sex story. There's a tale in Kama Sutra, filtered through Ottoman adaptation, about a concubine who spent an entire year preparing for her first night with the Sultan only, for him to fall asleep drunk and never summon her again. But she refused to be discarded. Instead, she created an elaborate system of perfume rituals that made her chamber smell so exquisite, eunuchs began stopping just to inhale. One day, the Sultan caught the scent. Days later, she bore him a son. Is it true? Who cares? It worked. Fringe fact: some concubines were trained in medicinal arts, taught to make ointments and herbal infusions. One compound, called Queen of the Night, was a scented paste made from rose, musk, and crushed pearls applied behind the ears before meeting a powerful man. Supposedly, it caused mild dizziness and euphoria. You imagine them whispering about it in the baths, trading recipes like secrets. You turn back to the courtyard, where the chanting has stopped. Now the girls are dancing, not seductively, but in patterns, like calligraphy in motion. Each movement mirrors a line of verse. You wonder how much of their original identity still lingers under the choreography. Do they remember their real names? Do they whisper them in the dark? Or have they folded themselves fully into this new persona, obedient, poised, waiting? A young girl stumbles slightly on a turn, and you catch the flicker of panic in her eyes. But she recovers, smooths her skirt, glances at her instructor. No reprimand today, just a nod. She sleep better tonight. Maybe. You feel it again, that mix of beauty and claustrophobia, of elegance layered over coercion. The Harem school was both a finishing academy and a forge. It burned away weakness, reshaped trauma into performance. And all of it aimed at one possible outcome: to be chosen. Not just for a night, but for something bigger. And if not? If you failed the tests, if your poetry fell flat, your dance too rigid, you'd vanish into the lower ranks, quietly like smoke trailing off incense. No one would ask where you went. No one would say your name again. You feel the air shift before the scent hits you: clove smoke laced with burnt sugar and something ancient, like forgotten spice caravans. You've wandered into the Sultan's private chamber, but it doesn't feel like a bedroom. It feels like a showroom, a theater, a transaction. On the cushions lie bolts of silk from China, jars of ambergris from Zanzibar, ivory combs, sapphire rings, manuscripts bound in lion hide. These are not gifts, these are tools. Because tonight, you learn the truth. The Sultan's love life was an economy. A silent, seductive marketplace where women were currency. Sex was diplomacy, and the empire's future traded hands between velvet sheets. Look closer. That concubine in the corner, feeding the Sultan pistachios one by one? She's not just a flirt. She represents an entire faction. Maybe the Janissaries want her to rise. Maybe she's backed by the court scribes. Maybe someone's paid to make sure she bears a son. Her body is a bond, her favor a stock to be traded. The Ottoman court didn't just tolerate this, it engineered it. The Sultan's bedroom was the most valuable square footage in the empire, because whoever controlled it controlled succession. And that meant access to wealth, war, and history. The stakes were astronomical. You might think that sounds paranoid, but think again. What's the one thing that could bring down a 1,000-year dynasty faster than war or plague? A love story gone wrong. So the empire regulated desire like a corporation. The Sultan couldn't have a queen, because that would create dangerous political alliances. Instead, he cycled concubines, often only sleeping with each woman once. If she conceived, she rose. If not, she disappeared. One night to change your destiny. That's it. Historians still argue whether this practice created a more stable government or a deeply traumatized monarchy. What's clear is that love was never private. It was public policy. Here's your sex story. In one scroll found in the Harem archives, there's a tailpart fact. part palace whisper of a concubine from Venice who didn't speak a word of Turkish. She communicated only through touch, silence, and the language of scent. Before every meeting with the Sultan, she rubbed herself with a secret blend of crushed violets, fig sap, and honey. It became her signature. No one else smelled like her. Eventually, other concubines tried to replicate the formula. One accidentally used fox urine instead of fig sap and was exiled for offending divine sensibility. Whether true or not, the story stuck because it revealed the stakes. Smell wrong, walk wrong, touch wrong, and your life vanished. Fringe detail. The Sultan's bedding was changed daily, sometimes hourly, not for hygiene, but to prevent lingering influence from previous lovers. Some believed a lingering perfume could disrupt fertility or cause unwanted dreams. It wasn't just paranoia, it was bureaucracy. Every scent, every trinket, every intimate moment was logged, counted, archived. Even semen, according to some Ottoman medical texts, was considered a state resource tied to lineage, vigor, legitimacy. You stare at the throne-like bed. It's not romantic, it's practical. Built high so concubines had to climb into it. Symbolic, yes, but also strategic. The act of climbing up, undressing slowly, become invisible from every angle, it all fed into the performance. You imagine the nerves, you imagine the calculation. Because remember, a child meant status, but only one child per mother. That was the rule. Once she bore a son, she was retired from the Sultan's bed, sent to raise him in a different palace. Why? To prevent power cliques. To keep mothers from becoming queens in all but name. But it didn't work. Because even after they left the bed, they kept their teeth. Some wrote letters back to the harem, bribed eunuchs, spied through embroidery patterns, sent as gifts. Love wasn't over. It just changed costume. You look around and notice something you missed before. Every item in this room, every pillow, mirror, incense burner has been placed with intention. Not for beauty, for messaging. The jade teacup, a nod to Chinese alliance, the ostrich egg hanging from the ceiling, a fertility symbol meant to subtly nudge the Sultan's psyche. Even the shadows on the walls have been choreographed by the placement of lanterns. You're not in a bedroom. You're in a machine, a seduction engine, a dynastic cockpit. And the women who understood how to work it, they weren't just lovers. They were pilots, navigating an erotic economy more powerful than any army. There's a silence in the palace tonight that feels different. Not calm, not peaceful, just tired. Like the walls themselves are exhaling after centuries of secrets, scandals, and silk. You step out into the courtyard where ivy strangles. The marble columns and the scent of decaying rose petals hangs in the air like a memory. The harem is fading. Not empty, not abandoned, but no longer the burning heart of the empire. Something has shifted. The whispers are duller, the fabrics less fine. The empire itself is fraying at the edges, and you can feel it in every draft that slips beneath the door. Once, the harem pulsed with ambition. Now it limps with nostalgia. This is the age of decline, of too many wars and too few victories. Of sultans who sit more than they conquer, who chase pleasure because they no longer know how to chase glory. And when the empire softens, so does its grip on secrecy. Stories leak out. Servants sell tailies to European travelers. Embassies write gossipy dispatches. You begin to see what was never meant to be seen. Here's one of those stories. A concubine named Dulferuz, once beloved by Sultan Mahmud II, is found with a French book hidden under her mattress, a romantic novel. Scandalous. Not because she could read, but because she wanted to. Women were still educated, but curiosity was becoming dangerous. The Sultan reportedly dismissed her not for defiance, but for dreaming. It's hard to control a dreamer in a crumbling palace. The walls don't echo the way they used to. Eunuchs age, their power diluted. The ranks of the harem swell, not with ambitious girls, but bored daughters of Ottoman bureaucrats parked here for safety, for status, for lack of better options. The training becomes lazier, the perfume cheaper. Some concubines are seen sneaking out to visit Christian neighborhoods, disguised in civilian garb. Love begins to happen in the open, not the state-sanctioned kind, but real, reckless, unfiltered. Love. Historians still argue whether the decline of the harem accelerated the empire's fall or merely mirrored it. What's undeniable is this: the harem lost its mystery, and with it, its power. Once, the women inside controlled succession. Now, they're barely controlling the menu. Fringe fact: in the final decades, the harem's kitchens produced more jams than political schemes. Quince jam, rose petal preserves, even a bizarre cucumber marmalade. Entire days went into perfecting sweet things no one really wanted. A metaphor. If ever there was one, you stroll through the abandoned rooms. Dust coats the mosaics. The turtles no longer carry candles. They're just turtles now. In one chamber, you find a trunk filled with silk robes, some torn, some never worn. A ledger lies open beside it, detailing who wore what, when. Even the bureaucracy has grown tired. No one bothers to close the book, and then you find it. A letter, tucked between two floor tiles, yellowed with age, barely legible. It's unsigned, but you recognize the voice, poetic, sharp, tired. It reads like a goodbye. The writer speaks of a last night spent with a sultan who no longer remembered her name. She describes the way he touched her face gently, like trying to recall a dream. She knew she would never be summoned again. But she wasn't sad, just hollow. She ends with a single line, asterisk, I was once a secret. Now I am only a story. You sit there for a while, unsure how long. Long enough for the oil in the lamps to sputter, for the birds in the cypress trees to settle. The harem, as you now understand, was never about love. Not really. It was about power disguised as intimacy, strategy wrapped in silk, a world where the softest touch could be sharper than a sword. And yet, somehow, in all that machinery, there were still real moments. A stolen kiss, a letter kept under a pillow, a girl who dared to love someone she wasn't supposed to. And those moments matter, because even empires built on control can't erase the tremble of a heartbeat. As the curtain falls on this place, you walk out slowly, past the fountains, past the ghosts. You carry their stories now, not as gossip, but as echoes, faint, but still here. End of script. Sweet dreams.